So only about 10% of community college students transfer out per year. And for a community college student, it's an uphill battle to transferring out to a four-year university. So today I'm going to be telling you the essential community college tips that I use to go from a average student to transferring out and getting accepted to every UC school that I applied to. Because if you have dreams to go into top schools like UC Berkeley, Stanford, UC Merced, not UC Merced, but UCLA, you get the point. You're going to have a strategy and be an above average student at community college to successfully transfer out. So without wasting more time, let's go into the essential community college tips to transfer out to top universities. Okay, so starting off with the most useful tip in my opinion is utilizing Rate My Professor. So what is Rate My Professor if you don't already know what it is? So basically with Rate My Professor, you could look into the ratings of your professor that you might take. So with this, you could look into what past students have said about this professor, whether it being bad or good, or tips you need to know to succeeding in the class. It also gives you an average rating of 1 through 5. So personally, I would only take professors that have a rating of 4 and above, because who wants to take the bad professor that just teaches poorly and has a low grade average? So I dodged a lot of bullets by using Rate My Professor for every single class that I took, and it made keeping a GPA pretty easy at community college, because essentially when you're trying to transfer out to a top university, what they care about most is GPA and your essays. So the first part of the equation, GPA, could be made a lot easier by just using Rate My Professor for every class and making sure you avoid the bad professors and you get insights of what you need to do to get an A with a certain professor. So if you're not already using Rate My Professor, please start using it. Moving on to the second part of the equation of getting into top universities, your essays. So with your essays, to improve your essays and make yourself stand out, you need to find your X factor. And by X factor, I mean something to differentiate you from other candidates, because anybody can have a high GPA, but for these top universities on how they curate who gets in and who doesn't, it's about your X factor and what you write in your essays. So an X factor could be a plethora of things. It could be a summer internship that you did. It could be research that you did, volunteering, working a part-time job. That's personally what I did. Or it could be like running your own business or anything along those lines. And you could increase your chances of standing out if your X factor and your values in your essays align with the school's identity or culture. So what I mean by identity and culture, so every school has a different brand and a certain criteria that they're looking for in their student to match their brand. So for example, UC Berkeley, their brand and identity is rooted in activism, entrepreneurship, for more on the business side, because they're right next to Silicon Valley and all these startups. So they want to find students that are going to continue their identity of being entrepreneurs, of being activists on campus. And if you write about these things in your essays, it only helps your chances of getting into that school. So doing your research and knowing what a school stands for is extremely important when you're writing your essays. And going back to X Factor, you want to make sure your X Factor is something authentic and you're not just making it up to stand out. Because another thing about these essays is you really want to talk in-depthly about how you felt during the experience of doing whatever you did, and also what prompted you to do that and how that's going to contribute to that school's community. So if you haven't already, try to understand your X factor and how you're going to differentiate against all the other candidates, because that's what's going to make or break your application. And with my last tip for you today, this contributes to the GPA portion of getting into these top universities. So with this tip, you need to take the easier classes to fulfill your transfer requirements. So what the hell does this mean? So when you're transferring out to a university, you need to fulfill 2 different requirements: your major requirement and also your general ed classes. So with major classes, they're pretty set in stone on what classes you need to take, and it's really hard to flip-flop that class for an easier class. But with your GE class, you have a lot of flexibility on what class you could take to fulfill that requirement. So an example of this and what I did, so for my science requirement, you think of fulfilling that requirement with just like a bio class or a chemistry class. But those classes, when I looked them up on Rate My Professor, with every professor, the average grade was a B. And myself trying to keep a perfect GPA, that was not going to slide, and I knew I was going to have to put in a lot of work to get an A in that class. But instead of taking the harder route and taking that bio or chem class, I took marine biology. And surprise, surprise, the average grade for marine biology at my community college was an A. So shout out to marine biology for keeping my GPA up. I greatly appreciate that. But that's just an example of using this method of just taking the easier class to fulfill a requirement rather than taking the hard classes. So just make the transfer process a lot easier by knowing what classes you could switch out for an easier class, because it's going to make life a lot easier. And then you could allocate your time to your X factor or improving your essays. And that wraps up the tips that I have for you today, but look out for a part 2 coming out soon. So subscribe to the channel and also like this video. But with that, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.